There we are. And we're live. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a real privilege to have so many of you tune in this evening on International Women's Day. I hope you've all had a fabulous day and you've done something to celebrate in addition to coming to tonight. Celebrate yourself and the fabulous women in your life as well. So welcome. We're going to have an awesome hour. We've got some fantastic guests lined up that I'm going to introduce you to shortly. But just quickly, myself, I'm Kristen Lunman. I'm the co-founder and GM of Hatch. We're an investing platform and have been in the New Zealand marketplace for just over 2 years now. Have almost 100,000 strong on the platform, and we have a really strong vision of that every Kiwi should be a millionaire on Hatch, and we've had some great success with that so far, but recognize we're just at the beginning of this journey. But specifically, we want to talk about women tonight. We're probably going to start with general success and career and pathway and challenge with these fantastic women, but then we're going to get into a bit of money as well and how to empower ourselves in that area and take back control. So without further ado, I just want to, the theme for International Women's Day, before I intro people, is choose to challenge. And so I think choosing to challenge means that we're calling out gender bias, the status quo, we're stamping out we're celebrating women's achievements, something that we're doing tonight, and collectively we're creating an inclusive world, an inclusive New Zealand. So without further ado, I'll now introduce you to three amazing women who are founders, entrepreneurs, and have a number of successes under their belts at incredibly young ages. First, I want to intro you to Mikayla Hopkins. She's the founder of Her Career, but also Chief Marketing Officer at The Face Place, New Zealand's first medical spa. She's got a passion for helping young women succeed, and she's made an incredible start by founding Her Career. If you don't know about it, check out hercareer.org. Their mission is to create 1 million empowered moments to help women grow their career, money, and network. She's held senior brand manager and chief marketing officer roles. She's an exceptional leader known for lots of success in the fast-moving consumer goods, health and beauty industries. Welcome, Mikayla. So nice to have you. Sian Simpson is a founder and award-winning global businesswoman and super fab. She is the founder of Public Rally. That is, Public Rally was launched, prior to Public Rally. I'll explain in a minute. She was the former director of community at Kiwi Landing Pad. If you don't know about it, it's a bridge between New Zealand and US tech communities, and she grew that community to over 6,000 strong. She was named in 2020 as a finalist in New Zealand High Tech Awards and also received the New Zealand Global Women of Influence Award in 2017. Back to Public Rally, they're an agency dedicated to bringing world-class communities, something she's very good at, and content strategies to clients in tech, music, legal, and education sectors. And then finally, we've got Natalie Ferguson, who is a serial founder and a co-founder and head of experience at Hatch. She founded her first startup at the age of 19 while in university. She caught the bug and came to Hatch with almost 20 years of experience taking businesses from idea to execution to even exit. She's a UX master, and she's helped private and public companies organizations around the world adopt human-centered design. She's an avid believer in living life to the full, as actually all of our panelists are tonight, and she strongly believes that investing gives us the power to live our dream lives. So I'm going to kick into it. Hope everyone's doing great. So nice to have you here. And I'm going to start with the first question, and I'm going to start with Sian. I'm curious, Sian, if there's a defining moment on your road to kind of where you're at today, which I would suggest, you've had accolades, you've had this incredible global career. Was there a defining moment on the road, something that kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for everyone joining. I think the two moments I would say for me that were defining in sort of my path today, one would be my decision to stay in San Francisco when I landed there. I went there to explore technology and absolutely loved it, and so decided, well, as a 23-year-old pretty spring chicken, that actually being there was the best thing that I could do for my career at the time, and it definitely was. I learned a lot. And then the second one, I don't know if anyone knows my backstory, but I was determined determined to be a remote worker and live that whole nomad lifestyle before it was cool, and even had my own blog before blogging was cool. And there was just a moment where I realized that my remote life was actually working when I was around 23, and that I could live, work, study, and be anywhere I wanted to, as long as I had the internet and power and my computer, obviously. And I mean, remote working now it's what we do because we're living in a pandemic. But I guess for the last 10 years, I felt like an alien because everyone's around that whole diatribe around, well, you can't be doing anything. You're not productive if you're working remotely, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so I guess I achieved that quite early on, and I've kind of always just lived that and wanted that freedom.
That's awesome. And obviously, Mikayla, who's at home and embracing the remote lifestyle, tell us about your kind of any key kind of moments along your pathway, any decisions you had to make, forks in the road.
Yeah, I think my most defining moment for me, I had a really warped view of what success looked like growing up. And so for me, success looked like a really great title on LinkedIn and a 6-figure salary. And I remember the moment that I got that contract and had all of that on the page, I had such a buzz and I felt so elated because I had achieved something that I had wanted for so long. And about a day later, that buzz had kind of worn off, and it clicked to me that it wasn't the title or the salary that was important. It was all the relationships that I'd made along the way, and being able to come home to a partner and share with him what I'd learned and problem solve and help other people in the companies that I was within, and also feel a greater sense of purpose, something that was bigger than just me. And so for me, my, I guess what you would say defining moment was actually redefining what success looked like.
It's so funny because I don't know if you got that from your parents, but no doubt there is an archaic view of what success is. And there's so many unhappy people in the world that look like they have the dream jobs, the dream life. Right. So how incredible that you're so young and were able to kind of smash that and find it yourself. Nat, talk to us about kind of like big things through life, defining moments.
I think firstly we all have a lot in common, and I think Sian, the blog thing before blogging was cool. And the remote working before remote working was cool, and maybe our lipstick color as well. But I had almost the same but opposite. I again have two key moments, I think. And one was when I was quite young. I was just joining uni, and I was starting to look at starting this company. And a few people said to me, "Why are you doing that? That is such a stupid idea. Why don't you go get a job like everyone else? This is never going to work." And it was amazing, the huge amount of pressure. And it's funny to look back at now, but the huge amount of people who just straight up, friends, family, everyone said, "Bad idea. Why are you doing it?" And I did it anyway. And it turned out really, really well. So I think I got that early confidence of what people think is the norm is often, there's a well-trodden path, go against it at every opportunity, because most of the time when people have done stuff forever, there's always opportunity to do it better, and being thoughtful about the way you want to live is the right way. And then I think the second one is sort of summed up by both of you, that I think that idea of cut your ego. Like, I think we all have this idea of what success looks like, and every time I've hit those stages that I've worked hard for, it's almost been the opposite of what I expected to feel, and I've really focused on it and gone, I thought I was going to celebrate and feel great, and you do get that for a minute, but quite often you look and go, but am I happy? And always following the happiness path has, I found it never fails, whereas following the ego path always ends up with what looks good on paper, but not what makes you feel good.
Yeah, 100%. Common theme there, for sure. Back to Sian, I'm curious about challenges, because like you're all obviously fabulous, but tell us some like real crap moments on the journey. Tell us one or two, that'd be fabulous.
we all start somewhere, right? So I would say I've got a list, so I'm just going to tell everyone what it is. And I think these are very relatable to everyone on their journey. The biggest one is self-doubt. We just get in our way so much, and I think there's the only way through that is to just like stop doubting yourself and get on with it. You don't need to. One is ageism. I was incredibly young when I was in my position, and coming back to New Zealand in a predominantly male set. It's changed a lot now. Like this was, 7, 8 years ago, I think. Ageism and people. I couldn't get a job in New Zealand that I wanted when I was leaving, and that's why I left. So I'm really happy it's changed now. People not believing you in your experience, people not having faith in your opinion just because you're young is so heartbreaking. Lucky that's changing. I had a lot of people not actually help me, and surprisingly, they were older women. I had a lot of men help me in my tech journey, but not necessarily women. Definitely changing now, but that kind of really sucked because as a Kiwi offshore, there wasn't that many people doing what we were doing, and not being supported by the people that you think would kind of suck.
You know, any inkling as to why? Like, what was it? Was it the ageism thing, or?
I did used to be pretty brash, and I've kind of toned that down a lot now, but you know, you got to be aware of your own flaws. I don't think that's a flaw anymore though, because I'm, you know, a bit more diplomatic. Working with the government will do that to you. And also living in America, but I don't know, like people are just who they are. And I think there's this kind of, there has been this old guard, new guard kind of thing, but now that's kind of going away because we've all sort of realized that we need to get through this together, and we need to break those glass ceilings together. Otherwise there's no point. A few other ones were, I actually couldn't afford the things that I needed to do in terms of professional development, but I turned those into positives. Examples, a lot of how I got into video production in the US and got known for that was actually cold calling conferences and creating content for them for free. So I turned that around. And then the last one I would probably say is that because I was walking such a unconventional path from such a young age, is that people found me really weird, and that made my journey incredibly lonely, even though now everyone thinks it's great and woo. But I'm like, well, actually, instead of being weird, I wish they had just been slightly more intrigued rather than making me believe something that I actually wasn't. Like, I'm not weird, I'm pretty normal. You know, unique.
Can I just back off that quickly before I go to Mikayla and her challenges? I'm curious about where did that come from? Was that instilled through family or parents, like kind of carving your own path, which it was a very unique path?
I think it was a combination of like going through so much trauma that I decided really early on that life's too short to not live it. And I didn't want to waste my time living someone else's life that I just like didn't like the look of. And then meeting the right people in my journey who kind of helped me have the self-belief to follow that path that I really wanted to have. And I still have a pretty unique life, but I think now it's more seen as like, I don't want to be like wanky when I say this, but like aspirational versus like super weird. Yeah.
It's probably much more accepted now, isn't it? Well, yeah. Amazing. Mikayla, what about you and kind of some challenges you've encountered?
Yeah, it's interesting you said ageism, Sian, because that has been the biggest barrier that I found, even more so than sexism, which is fascinating given the day it is. But for me, ageism is something that I feel like I've dealt with since day dot, and people not being able to take me seriously, despite, you know, showing up and being like, I'm here to work, I'm here to do the thing, and people still putting up roadblocks and using my age as an excuse not to give opportunity. And I remember even being at leadership conferences and millennials, which I'd be classified as being like the butt of the joke with speakers. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable in the room being the youngest in there and thinking, why are we not celebrating this new demographic as opposed to always just throwing so much, I mean, it's too dramatic to say hatred, but there was always such a negative lens on the millennial side of things and younger people coming up through the ranks. And yeah, for me, I really struggled with ageism and being written off before I was given the chance to prove what I could do. And I think as well, just for the sexism lens, which I like, that's a whole conversation I could speak to for hours. But what is really interesting is even since university, looking in the business textbooks, is the visual representation of what a business person looks like. And that to me, like, I think if you can't see what you want to be, it makes it a lot harder to get where you want to go. And even as recent as like a year ago, I remember jumping on Canva to try and build a presentation and just typing in leader or business person, and the only images that were coming up were men. And I remember sitting there being so frustrated, and yeah, same as like Shutterstock, just blown away that it was 2020 and that was still the visual representation of a business person. So yeah, I found that
that sounds dire as a mum raising a daughter, because I was like, oh yeah, I experienced it, but surely people don't anymore. But that sounds really dire.
I think it still ties into that thing, and someone said this to me the other day, and I was like that whole like boss babe, and and it kills me. I'm like, no, I'm not this lady person. It's like I'm actually just good at my job. Like it doesn't. You don't have to add the lady part to it, right? It's not a category.
I agree.
Oh my gosh, Nat, tell us about your some challenges.
Well, I feel like, again, I just want to say same. I suppose the biggest one for me that I hardly ever talk about, but as a much older lady now, I am much more comfortable talking about it because I want other people to avoid the same thing. The biggest mistake in my career was a relationship, basically, meeting someone very, very young who was a horribly abusive person who ruined my self-confidence and my finances for many years. And the reason that kind of really I learned so much from it over the next decade, but I think that's something that I highly recommend to every woman now, especially, is have your own finances and stay in control of your finances, and also like you own your reputation and your personal brand. And quite often, women end up in this, where humans are very adaptable, and I know it's both sides, but we're talking about women today, that you end up in these really bad and dire situations, and you feel very lonely, and you end up, kind of going with it for way too long. So for me, being like, getting the support to leave situations like that, and also getting your finances together so that you own your decision making and that you can buys you the freedom to leave. That was the biggest thing for me to kind of, in my career as well as my life, it all kind of fits together for me.
Crazy. Nat, you're in, well, we all are actually. We've established that it's relatively male-dominated, historically male-dominated industries, probably still are, to be fair, respective tech, health, and finance. Talk about kind of navigating that and what that is like. Do you feel, I don't know, like you're taken seriously in that space?
It is kind of interesting. I think you and I deal with this a little bit, and we probably have a lot of conversations around it. I think it's, I've come from a tech background, so again, another heavily male-dominated industry, and you start to really, I'm a very nosy person, so you often see, even within tech, women are the designers and the people leaders and the HR and the marketing, and men are the developers. And when you start looking at all these things, you kind of start to go, oh, I don't want to do that, and I want to be part of the solution of sort of showing other women what the actual jobs are and how they might be different. But I would say, from our perspective, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I think being a woman and being not from the finance industry has presented a lot of challenges. I think the way we talk, and I think we're deliberately plain English, really forces us to have to defend that we know what we're talking about a lot. I think quite often the assumption is when we go in that we don't know until we kind of can communicate enough to have proved ourselves to then be able to start the meeting, which sometimes I want to say, can we just cut this part? Can we just cut the part that you recognize we know what we're talking about, so we can get 20 minutes out of the meeting? But that, to be fair, I feel like one of the things that I found is as your reputation grows, and I think as Hatch's reputation has grown, you get that less and less. I think we have a battle to sort of set that idea that we know what we're doing, but and I don't think we should have to do that any more than anyone else does. But yeah, I think I think because we have had two very visible female faces from day one, the people have we haven't had to, had the same problems as maybe if there was a male fronting the business.
Yeah, no, fair. Sian, I want to hear firstly about your experiences in kind of male-dominated industry. Got the ageism, curious about sexism, but like your take on the US, because you were there for so long, and there is a particular reputation that kind of US and the Valley has, and so kind of your thoughts on yourself and kind of rep there.
I didn't have any issues in the US at all. I think people, for me, and keep in mind that I am white, and so that probably has something to do with it. I still was a woman, but the opportunities I had in the US, it was more about, it's a bit of a meritocracy, and like if you do what you say you will and you're good, then people will endorse you. And I guess it's about finding those allies. I actually experienced a lot of sexism in New Zealand, and the experience, I joined a board, and someone who was kind of an exiting CEO was just horrible. And it was the first time, and I said to him, I was like, I'm just having that moment where I realized that I can't do anything right, but it's not because of who I am or my experience or anything. It's only because I'm a woman and I'm young. And he was like, well, yeah. And I was like, that's so heartbreaking. That thing where you're like, I'm the wrong gender. That's the problem. And there's nothing I can do about that as a human being. And I just found that as someone who just strives and achieves my whole life, there wasn't any way around that situation. It just was what it was. So I think in the US, there is a lot of hype around the media, and there's like TechCrunch articles and stuff about culture, and it does exist. And I guess people like startup culture can be pretty loose, and like as you grow, you have to button up quite a lot, and founders do have to change a bit once they get to, I think, 100 people plus. Like how you grow up your company is not how it's going to be sustained. And I think New Zealand companies need to be aware of that, and also like that loosey-goosey kind of way of being has kind of left the valley now. It's not appreciated. And also just like around that remote culture building and whatnot, like if you're a man and you like going in for drinks at 4 p.m. or whatever, like that's great, and women do too, but like some people don't. And like we just need to find ways of adapting our culture and our ways of being so that it's actually inclusive and diverse. A few other things on that around like navigating the gender bias and all that is offering a hand to those people, like younger women or even younger men who need to help up. But I've actually spent a lot of time explaining to people how they're being sexist or undiverse or not inclusive. And some people have actually been really grateful for that, because they're like, I just don't see it. I'm like, well, thank you for acknowledging that you don't see it and why it's a problem. And it's not my job to educate those people, but I'm happy to fill that role for people.
Do you find it really language or behavior, or both?
Kind of both. And the irony is most people have daughters, right? And like, would you treat your daughter like this? They all want them to be treated like this. And they're like, no. I'm like, well, why are you doing it to me? They're like, ah, shit.
Sorry.
What was that, Natalie?
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the things that I realized, just to back to your question about in the industry. I actually think the hardest part is the surrounding environment. It's very hard to go in. Like we do quite a lot of sort of partner negotiations, that sort of stuff. And when you've come from sort of the wider society where you'll be out and someone will say, oh, it's Black Friday tomorrow, you must be getting your purse ready. And like, and you're like, oh no, actually tomorrow I'm really busy in meetings all day, but thanks that because I was a lady, you assumed that I would be dropping everything for the sales. And I think when you actually look at the surrounding environment and the conversations that sort of slip past day by day, that's the sort of stuff that really can knock your confidence and make you go, is that all I am? But I think your point, Sian, about taking the role that is not our job, but we should do it anyway, of educating is really useful. And I have a few friends who are very strong on this, that they just won't take it anymore, and they're not rude about it, but when someone says something flippant, they stop and say, can we talk about this? And people change. And I think it's the same with when you talk about skin color. If you don't live that experience, I don't think it's fair to expect you're constantly aware of it at the level that someone who's living that experience is. So it is our job to sort of help people along, as frustrating as it can be, and to actually stop and have those conversations, because the self-confidence hits you get from just sort of the wider society can impact your job.
I think that's actually one thing, just to add on the US experience, is that there are so many groups and minorities over there that you're forced to have an opinion on everything. And I think that's something that New Zealand's actually quite sheltered from. And a lot of my friends in the US, like they do a lot of research, they're very well educated, they just like constantly learning and having opinions. And if you do something wrong, they'll just nicely, politely be like, oh, like, that's not really how it is, or they'll just front it. Whereas I think Kiwis are a bit polite, or they'll be like, oh, I don't like that person at all anymore because of X, Y, Z. And you're like, well, I wish you would have just told me.
No, fair point. Takes bravery, though. Mikayla, do you have kind of an example of sexism and any tips that might have worked for you?
Yeah, I don't know about particular examples here, but just I think around the whole calling out conversation, I think that's so important. 5 years ago, I never would have called it out. I never wanted to rock the boat. I didn't want to create conflict, and I would just brush it off as, I'm not gonna address this. And now I address every single situation. And like you guys said, often, not always, but often people are not deliberately trying to be awful. It's just their lack of education. And I think something that's really important to me and what we do at Her Career is not pointing the finger at men, because I do think it's a full team effort. I hate to say that, but it is a full team effort, and it's about championing men who also platform and create space for women. So, for example, I remember being at this conference, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was the first time I saw a man stand up for feminism and equality in the room, and it was probably 60 to 70 C-suite leaders, and there was a panel of 5 men up the front, not a single woman.
How does that still happen?
I know, this was 2019. It wasn't even that long ago. And he got up at the end of his conversation and he looked around the whole room and the panel, looked directly at the organizers and said, there's not a single female up here, and that's got to change. And so he was willing to risk his seat at the conference next year to make sure that that conference and the room was aware that he was not happy with the situation. And to me, I went up to him after and I was just like, keep doing that. Like, that makes a difference.
There's been a lot of people in the tech sector who actually started doing that a while ago when they realized there was a problem, where they were like, I'm not going to speak on any manels. They're not panels, they're manels.
I like that.
And that
the worst thing is, though, to correct it, it's like, we're looking for, like, you end up being the token female on the panel, and you know it, and there's also like, that is just as bad, and that comes from female.
You nail it. I think the problem is, like, yes, you might go in and that's that wider social thing, but every time that happens, the woman has an opportunity to nail it, and usually does, and then it changes a bit. So it's kind of like you go in as a token, you come out as a must-have, and I feel like that's it's sort of part of the hardship of change.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good.
Lady.
I know you sometimes, and they actually say it. They're like, anyway, but Nat, you I know you work long hours. I want to any tips or tricks on work-life balance? How are you balancing social, love, health? Like,
you just want to know about my love life, Kristen.
I want an update. But no, I do want to hear about, like, what the heck is it? Flexible work that works for you? Like, what's the deal?
I gave up thinking about balance a very long time ago, and what I think about now is high level balance. Like, day to day, it's completely imbalanced, and I'm totally fine with that. Some days I'll have a beautiful, calm Saturday and hang out. Other Saturdays, I'm like, I just, through no fault of my own, I'm obsessed with work and it's going through my mind. And I've just learned to go, if I ever feel like I'm tipping a point where it's no longer a joy and it's feeling overwhelming, that's when I stop, and I absolutely stop and just take a day off, because I know I'll make it up another time, or take an evening off, or I am a huge fan, and actually I have a good friend, Tony, who runs a company called Beauty Bliss, and I'm sure we've had conversation years ago about, the joy of watching TV, and how and Kristen, you're the same, we talk about it a bit. Everyone's like, I have so many hobbies and activities, and I'm like, I love sobbing sometimes. And my goal in a weekend is to spend half a day not talking to anyone, eating chocolate and watching TV, and that is success. And so I other days, going up for a walk, that's great. I'm doing 10,000 steps a day at the moment, trying to, and that's actually really healthy for me too, because I've got the 10,000 step goal, I will force myself to walk somewhere, which actually gives you that kind of mental space. But I don't believe in balance. I don't think it happens, but at a high level, you can make it happen by actually listening to yourself. I don't think it's weird to be a workaholic, because it's my hobby, it brings me joy. But I also know when it stops doing that, I have to stop it a little bit or roll back for a bit.
Yeah, fair call. Mikayla, what about you?
Next question. No, with balance, I'm the same as you now. I don't know if it exists in my space right now, and I'm learning to become okay with that. So I did know last year I completely burnt out. It was the first time I hit the wall. And I was always like, I'm that person that'll never ever hit burnout. I can go, go, go. Like, that is my strength, is I know I can push hard.
I say that.
And then
and what happened?
It happened, and it
what
was, it was awful. And then you almost question your identity when you tie so much into it, being able to go, go, go. You're like, who am I if I can't keep going? And so what really helped me is actually therapy and talking to somebody and being able to have the circular crazy mess that's up there and be able to put it out and spoken back to me in just simple terms. And I figured, if I go to the gym to work out my muscles and my physical body, why would I not go and invest in a therapist to work out my mind? Like, to me, they go hand in hand, and it's been amazing. I'm still working on balance. I still don't know what it is, but baby steps. We get in there.
Yeah, great. I love it. What about you, Sian?
Oh, yeah. I've burnt out twice, and I learned that the hard way. Like, I was a workaholic through most of my 20s. And actually the reason why I moved back to New Zealand was because my lifestyle was killing me. And so the reason why I moved back was for my health, so I could prioritize it. Like, I had chronic pain issues from being on planes all the time and working to death. And so, quite frankly, my work-life balance now, not that I believe in the concept, but I more sort of talk about it as output of hours. I just can't work long hours anymore. It just absolutely kills my health. And so I have a lot of boundaries. I definitely work hard. I kind of accept the ebbs and flows as they come up. So I've been in a stint at the moment where I do have to work quite a lot, but I kind of said to my partner, I was like, look, the next 8 weeks, I'm just going to be working a lot, like not on the weekends, because I don't really like to do that anymore. Because I used to do that all the time. Lucky they don't have to work the weekends anymore. If you're smart with your time, you can do that. And so, yeah, I kind of, planning is key for me, and those boundaries and kind of pushing back on people. A lot of people like, let's have a meeting on a Saturday or a Friday. I'm like, no, actually. And I don't have to tell them why. Like, I stopped feeling guilty around like, oh, I don't work on Fridays because of my health. I just said, actually, can we pick another time on a different day? Just ignore Fridays altogether. And they don't know any better. So I think that planning, boundaries, and rolling with it and prioritizing your health is what it is for me.
I think it's a really good point about you don't have to work long hours. I think there's all sorts of research that's been done now, and I think we've hit this really weird patch of like, the longer you sit in your seat, the harder you've worked. And all sorts of research shows that after about 30 hours in a week or 6 hours in a day, people's productivity across the board goes down. So I think, we switch at Hatch. We've always been about outcomes, not even outputs. We don't even care about outputs. Like, I'm like, if you write one email and you get X amount done with that one email, take the rest of the week off. Who cares? And when you actually think about life like that, you make decisions quite differently, I think.
Yeah, and I also love the idea that it's actually just not a concept. So let's throw it out and just recognize it's like this continuum of just life. And some days we're like great and killing it, and other days we're not. And like, my kids get ignored, and that's okay. Because like, can't be good at everything, right? So, but some days I'm super mom. Some days, but yeah, cool. I want to like, you guys are all so fierce, and there's probably a lot of women that are watching that kind of are like, I'm not brave enough, or I didn't chart that path, or potentially don't have a desire to kind of go out on their own, and that's totally cool. But if you were just to say, there are a couple commonalities, traits or skills about people who are successful, so that it's not like you don't seem so far removed from everyone. Like, what kind of are those traits that either women can develop, wherever they might be, if it's entrepreneurial or a corporate career, or mumming it? Like, what's kind of some of the success or commonalities that you kind of see in really successful people? I'll start with Mikayla,
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Like, I don't know anybody who doesn't get scared. And I think I would question your honesty if you were to say, I never get scared and I never experience self-doubt. So I think for me, it's just being aware that everybody feels that, and then also not taking no as an answer. And I remember I've got such a vivid example of where I didn't take no for an answer, and it resulted in the exact end game I was planning for. So I actually, before I jumped on this webinar, I wanted to check the dates and make sure I got it right. And I emailed somebody December the 6th, 2018, because I had them as the top of my guest, as my dream guest list in the podcast that we were going to launch for her career. And I had like butterflies even just thinking of the idea of getting on a call with this woman, because she was just in my eyes, like up here, and based in Australia. And I remember I communicated and messaged her probably 10 times. Like, I know that's verging on the air of like harassment, but I was so determined to have her in, like, kind of just, I was so determined to have her as part of this launch podcast. And I remember feeling like I had to push my pride aside and ask again and again through all the different channels. So I did LinkedIn, Instagram. I remember trying to make up email domains in the hope that it would reach her. And by the time, I think it was June 2020, I finally got an answer from her, and she was so lovely and so delighted to be able to be on the podcast. And the thing was, she just hadn't seen the messages. Like, that's all it was. It was not a matter of her saying no, or it had no reflection on who I was. And so I think not taking no for an answer and just pushing when you want something is a commonality that I see in other successful people.
What about you, Sian?
Few things on this. I just wanted to kind of point out your comment around like not wanting to go out on their own. I learned a long time ago that everyone has their own thing that they love and that they jam on. And my good friend Julie Fry kind of pointed this out when she did her ambition research in New Zealand. And some people's ambition is to be the best mum, or to be the best marketer, or to be the best founder, or have the best rose garden. And I think just kind of figuring out like, what is that thing that you want to be the best at, and go after that. Like, no one says that in order to be successful, you have to be an entrepreneur, or you have to have $1 million. Like, that's a diatribe that I think is old. So do whatever works for you. I think commonalities in what I think I see in successful people is like consistency, determination, having a vision, integrity. Some people aren't, unfortunately, but like the ones that I admire. And I think living your truth, and then for me, being the best version of yourself is really important. Yeah,
awesome. Nat?
Well, at risk of copying answers again, I think I was going to say the same thing. I was having a conversation with a new friend the other day, and she said something about her job, and I was like, how did you get into it? And she just said, I wanted a good job that I could do part-time because I always wanted children. And there was something about that just made me go, what a hero to be like, I know what I want to be great at in life, and I know the life that I want to live, and I'm going to take all the steps along the way to get there. And I think that's something that we vastly underestimate in life, is and again, it goes back to that living a life less traveled, because I think when you sit down and go, what makes me happy, and then you work towards that, that's success. Like, I actually don't know why we would value any other form of success than working towards the thing that makes you happy. And if you decide part way that doesn't make you happy anymore, changing course. So I think that's absolutely, for me, that's probably the big one.
Yeah, love it. Love it. I want to pivot to money and just chatting a little bit about money. We've got 20 minutes left. And I'm curious about, Mikayla, we'll start with you, kind of relationship with money, and kind of what does financial wellness mean to you?
Yeah, sure. So I think now I have an incredibly healthy relationship with money, and I've got good financial hygiene practices, but it did not start that way. I had such an incredibly scarce sort of mindset around it, because we never grew up financially stable, and it was very much paycheck to paycheck. And what I found really interesting, if you bring that into the conversation around investing, is I actually really struggled for a long time to let go of my money to make more money, because I had for so long tried to keep a hold of it because I was so scared to be without it. And it wasn't until, getting on conversations like these and starting that investing journey that I finally realized that there's a way to make your mindset much more abundant around money. And so for me, financial stability and health is about having the choice. To me, that's really important, is to have the choice to be able to do what I want when I want, and to be able to help people in a way that I see fit.
That's an incredible moment, recognizing that, kind of holding on, because I think that is, so interesting to have kind of caught that about yourself. What about you, Sian?
I think my mum will laugh at my comments. I've always had a pretty good relationship with money, and I would say that I love money. But before you think I'm weird, like, not in a maniacal way or an obsessive way, but more, I've always really understood its value and have really appreciated its value. My dad was an entrepreneur and my parents were business owners. And so when I think we were 8 and he did really good in business that year. And so we had so many Christmas presents. And then the next year he did really bad. And so we had like 1 or 2. And I remember just crying and being like, do you not love me anymore? And he was like, baby, that's not how it works. Like, this is just like how business works. And sometimes you do really good and other times you do really bad. And I like, even though it's like kind of heartbroken, it was like one of those first lessons where I was like, oh, okay, like this ebbs and flows. And, like, it wasn't necessarily about hard work, but it was like, what are the markets doing, or what are the macro impact? So that was quite interesting. So I've always had the lemonade stand. I think the other thing unique to me is I've always had a job since I was like 10. So I've never really gone without money, because I've always worked really hard for it. And so when I was 14, I gave up my Saturdays and Sundays and I worked at a hair salon. And so I've always been that way. And I did full-time uni whilst working full-time. And so, yeah, I think that was my relationship. I did waste a lot of money when I was younger. And I think, we're all into like recycling and sustainability. And I would sort of apply those same principles with your finances, which is just be anti-waste. And my words for this year around that are like, be intentional with what you're buying and make an effort at the same time. On the financial well-being, for me, it's just choice and not. I wanted to get to a point in my life where I didn't have to think so much about whether or not I could afford, a coffee or like have to skimp on groceries or whatever, but just being able to actually buy what I wanted to buy when I wanted to buy it.
I love that, being intentional about money, because I know that there's an increasing movement to be intentional about investing as well, and like really being quite deliberate about kind of the businesses that you're backing and the funds, and a lot of people getting into kind of responsible investing and that stuff. So I think that's incredible. That's a great way to live. Nat, what about you?
I love, Sian, that you say you love money, because I remember very recently having a conversation with someone who said they hate money and they're just not into it. And this is a very common thing with women, that they're like, I'm just not a money person. I'm not greedy. I don't care. And I said, cool, that's great. So what do you want to do with your life? And she's like, I'd love to travel more. And I really want to sort of live half my time here. And then, God, it'd be great to have babies and take some time off. And I was like, and what do you think funds all those things? And she just had this light bulb moment of, it's money. Like, that's what money does. It buys me my choices. And I've had that conversation a million times now, because it's such an easier response to someone who says they hate money. I think deep down we all love money, because unless we're going to overthrow the system, it's the thing that we are working with, the mechanism to live our own lives. So and once you sort of get that connection, it all sort of falls into place, and you stop thinking about it as greedy or this weird sort of Scrooge McDuck thing. But I also think we're twins, because I think I first started working around 8 or 10, walking the local dogs, and again, always had to earn my own pocket money and always understood the value of a dollar. So I think so to me, the biggest thing about money is how you get it. And I think there's 2 things for me that have really stood true. One is I always want to be non-replaceable as much as possible, and everyone's replaceable, but I really wanted to work so hard to be someone who added so much value that it made sense to keep paying me and to pay me what I'm worth. And I'm really uptight about that. And it's not, again, it comes across as really greedy, but I just think it's so important, especially for women, to be like, I am so confident that I deserve this much money that you're paying me for my time, because it's one of the biggest investments we make. Because I back that I've done whatever I can to be the best at what I do. Again, if it's something else that you're interested in, like motherhood or something that's unpaid, sorry, I don't have the answer. I'm not a mother, but for earning money at work. And then secondly, why should I be spending all my time earning money when my money could be earning me money? And I think, again, that's a real light bulb moment, is like going back to work-life balance. There's only so many hours in the day that I can work. And I have really big ambitions for the kind of life I want to lead. And when I say big ambitions, it's not luxury yachts, it's time and it's ability to spend time with my family and live in a warm home and go on holidays. That there is a limit to how much money I can earn by swapping hours for dollars. So making wise decisions about how to use my money to make me more money to be able to live those dreams. And also I think that the third thing, like I suppose, is how you use your money. And I think for me it's buying you time and opportunity to do the things you love to do. But also I think one of the biggest misconceptions I've heard over and over and over again about rich people is that they're greedy and selfish. And every time I've met, I mean, a lot of us work in the tech industry and know a lot of tech founders. One of the things they never talk about is how much money they give away and donate towards things that they really care about, or donate towards starting new businesses that hire more people, that create more opportunities and change countries. Like you look at New Zealand and Wellington, and there's probably a couple of companies that are responsible for, a huge amount of change to how we live. So I think amassing money and being interested in money actually buys you the opportunity to give towards things that you really care about and take the time to even work with them. So I think that's a sort of very under talked about thing.
And I think, was it Mikayla, you said you had a real aha moment with kind of savings versus investing. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, of course. So for me, term deposits was always my go-to. And if anybody's seen a term deposit at the moment, you all know you're not becoming a millionaire with your term deposits, right? So for me, like the investing side of thing, I always thought in my head it was such an old boys club thing to do. There's no way I would ever have access to anything like that until platforms like yours have come around and we've been able to have such wider, more in-depth conversations around how easy it actually is to get started. And I think it was something that you said during one of our webinars, like a couple of years ago or a year ago. You don't have to put up such a huge barrier thinking that you'd need $50,000 to make your first deposit. Get out there and start playing, even if it's $50. If that's 10 coffees you're missing out on over a month, but the learning and the education that you're going to get from playing with that is going to be exponential. And so for me, that was how it started, is I just put money aside and I began learning, because I put up such a huge wall initially thinking it's going to take too long to understand how this all works. And before you know it,
that's awesome. And I'm just going to go back to back questions to you, Mikayla, because I think, so we've kind of talked a little bit. Sian had a great point about that in terms of becoming over our lifetimes, getting the amount of money that we need in order to kind of hit the vision or the dream life, or just actually live a fantastically rich life and healthy life. There's kind of the spending less. So thank you so much, Sian, for chatting about that, and kind of that deliberate approach, I think is amazing way to do that. We've talked about investing, so putting your money to work when you're not working for it, knowing your worth. Nat, you had some really great points about becoming really good about something and knowing your worth. But I think one thing we haven't touched on about is like how getting paid more is a way to make more money. And that's really hard for females. We know there's a pay gap still, even in New Zealand to this day. And I'm curious about, Mikayla, you've had quite a bit of experience with, you kind of said, don't take no for an answer. What are some really practical tips for kind of negotiating like what you're worth when you're going into a new job, or a salary increase, if you've got anything?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a great question. It's something I'm so incredibly passionate about. And like you said, we've got a pay gap in New Zealand, which is for the most part a pretty progressive country. I think it's 9.6 or 9.2, and then it's 14% for Māori women. So there's still a huge area there that we need to work on. In terms of practical tips, the number one thing that people come to me asking around the pay rise conversation, the number one thing that holds people back is confidence and thinking that it's greedy. And I disagree. I don't think it is greedy asking for more money. And if you feel fairly compensated for the work that you're doing in your role, you're going to put so much more into your job and your day-to-day, which is only then going to come back to the business. So to me, it's a win-win. So I always try and get people to first look at their market value. And there's like there is so much data at our fingertips. We're so fortunate. You've got payscale.com, which is a place I send everybody to start that process. And you go through, I think it's like 2 or 3, 4 pages, and you put in all your data. It spits out what the market value is for your pay, right down to your region, which is incredible. And it uses your qualifications, your years in the job, all of that to present you with this beautiful, screen of data that you can then use to actually have that conversation. And your hiring manager or your boss can't argue with data, right? So if you're able to present that to them, then that's going to go such a long way. And I think the other thing is the thing to remember is the worst thing people can say is no. Like, you're not going to get fired. The worst they're going to say is no. And even if that is the answer, then you work to a 6-month period of when you can have the conversation again. I think we put too much weight on it when it can be such a win-win.
Yeah, no, great tips. Sian, what about you? Any negotiating tips?
So in the last week, I've hired 6 people, and every single one of them was bloody sheepish around money. And it drives me mad, because I had to go in to bat for them to get the contract that I thought they were worth, but none of them backed themselves, and it bloody drives me mad. Like, why don't you just pick a number and roll with it? Like, I know that's incredibly scary to do, but the worst thing that someone can say is like, oh, actually, I can't do that. I can do $5,000 less. And you're like, oh, well, that's 10 grand more than I'm earning today. Woo, like, great. So I think just actually picking a number that is, I think there's this whole thing around, for me, it's not about working less or earning less or spending less. It's about deciding what is enough for you to live the life that you want. And the moment that you figure out what that number is, what that dream is for you, then you can structure your life around that and figure out how many hours you want to work, what type of business you want to be in, and actually how much you need to make ends meet and live the life that you want. On the negotiating stuff, stop being sheepish. I know it's scary, but just like, don't do that behavior anymore. And then I think actually just broaching the subject with people. So every single pay rise that I got when I was actually an employee was me going to my employer and being like, I've done all of this work. I think I'm worth more now. Can you please take a look at it and agree? And they're like, well, how much do you want? I'm like, I want this much. And they're like, okay, sure. Like, if I hadn't have asked, I would have never got that. And then also being willing to walk away. So I have plenty of people now where they'll be like, want to pay me half of what I'm worth. And I'm like, well, actually, no, like, I don't have enough time to work for a rate that's not, like, doesn't value me. And so I will go find work that values me and my time. And I know that sounds maybe like scary or wrong or how it is, but I think there are people in the world, if you're good at what you do, who will pay you what you're worth. And the only thing stopping you from getting that is figuring out what number is, and also proving that value, and also just not asking.
Yeah, I love it. And Nat, I know that you went through a big journey last year on figuring out what that number was in a movement called FIRE. Do you want to share a little bit of that?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say a couple of little things on that for the FIRE thing, because I think it does tie in. I think one of the things about a pay rise that you have to remove emotion from it. And if you go into a conversation with anyone saying, I've just had a child or I've bought a house or whatever, I don't care. I want to know why I should pay you that. And I think one of the things I read ages ago, and it might be Rich Dad Poor Dad, which was a terrible book, but I keep raving about it, is own your own business and think of yourself as your own business. And I think I sort of slightly disagree with you, Mikayla, about that sort of win-win of, if you're compensated more, you'll work harder. I believe you should make it impossible for people to say no because you work like you own the company, and then it's so obvious that they should give you a pay rise that it's a moot point, and add that to the data and that sort of stuff. I always feel like make it impossible for people to say no by being that valuable before you get the pay rise, because it makes it much easier for someone to give it to you. And also, like, I always think, I always ask myself, would I pay myself that? Because it's, someone else coming out of someone else's pocket. So make sure that it's obvious to them that you earn it. I think the FIRE number to me is always just put a a price tag or a number around the lifestyle I want to live. So a lot of people, I think, in their lives feel a victim to money, and money happens to them rather than they can control money. And I think pay rises is one case of that. But even retirement age, the number of people I say, when are you going to retire? And they say, isn't it 65 now or is it 70 now? And I'm like, no, I wasn't asking what time the pension kicks in. I was asking about when you want to retire. And I think the FIRE movement really sort of combats that. And basically, it's a really simple calculation. I won't go into it. You can Google it, FIRE, as in I'm on fire, movement. And it basically allows you to calculate a dollar amount that you need to have in order to be able to live comfortably the lifestyle you want for the rest of your life without having to work again. And whether or not, like sometimes when people sort of start from nothing and do that calculation, it's terrifying. But actually, you know, there's all sorts of stuff we have about compounding growth, and we can help fill in a lot of gaps there. It gives you a target and puts you in control of creating your life. And then just to tie it back to the pay rises, one of the things that I think is fascinating is we spend so much time talking about the $50 coffee money for a week, or small bits and pieces. If you get yourself a 1% pay rise a year, and that's all you've got, and you invest that money rather than not have that conversation, you have put yourself in a totally different financial situation. So taking the emotion out of it and stop thinking about it as a, am I worthy, am I not? Make yourself worthy. Make sure you know what other people in the same area and same stage as you are being paid, and make sure you're being fairly compensated, and then get it so that you can go and build this life that you want to build.
Done. Easy. You make it sound easy. That's great. And yeah, no, and look, I think there's lots of strong women that will support naturally. So before, we've got 3 minutes to wrap up, and I'm just going to ask a couple of quick fire questions. One is there a podcast or a book or a video series or whatever that you're reading, watching, listening to at the moment that you just want to share, that you're like, you got to be listening or watching this, other than Her Career, which is a fantastic podcast, but you can get that too. But go, Sian, what's kind of on your list at the moment?
There's probably one podcast and two books that I think were like quite interesting for me. One, Designing Your Life. Like, if you haven't done much lifestyle design, go read that book. It's pretty interesting. Two, The Next Door Millionaire, or The Millionaire Next Door, is an American-written book, but it actually had a lot of principles I thought really interesting around who you think is a millionaire is actually not a millionaire, and how they got there. And so it's a lot of stories around people who might have a combined household income of like $100,000, but actually how they invest and how they spend their money and the types of choices they make actually allow them to live their goals. And so that book was interesting. The podcast, big fan of She's on the Money. I think it breaks down financial concepts in an interesting way. I think you guys probably have a podcast too. Do you have a podcast?
Not yet.
Yeah, podcast. Listen to the Hatch podcast. It's coming out soon.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Great. Nat, what about you?
I'm going to say I'm not a big reader. I'm a big podcaster, but I'm going to scrap all that and say if there's any book you can do is taking out a blank sheet of paper and actually thinking for half an hour about the life you want to live and writing down some goals for yourself, because it sounds silly. People think it's weird. I guarantee if you do it, it will change your life. And whatever those goals are, suddenly you've got a concrete thing to work towards.
And you love Business Wars, but thank you for that great, obviously getting that out and great exercise. And Mikayla, we're going to end on you with, other books, podcasts, anything that's cool.
So I'm a big advocate actually of She's on the Money. I think it's incredible, and it speaks in the type of political language that makes everything easy to understand. And I think just to second what you've just said, Nat, I think having a target of what you want to achieve is key to it all. No matter what success looks like for you, knowing where you want to go changes everything. So I love that suggestion. It's a good one.
And one thing to add on that is just know your numbers. Like, if you don't know your numbers, if you don't know your incomings, outgoings, expenses, where you want to be and what's going on, I think one of the biggest things that disappoints me with women more often than not is they leave everything to someone else, or they don't know their numbers. And so if you want to do that plan, you need to know your numbers so you can figure out a pathway forward for yourself.
And a quick diss on the banks is that New Zealand banks haven't solved that problem, which is absolute garbage. Like, you just go to Australia and every major bank has got that sorted for you, whereas we've got to either do it in Excel sheets or search apps, to do that. So get your stuff sorted, New Zealand banks, or we'll just do it for you. But yeah, look, how cool to have these fantastic women. Hope everyone has enjoyed the night. Again, happy International Women's Day. Thanks so much to Mikayla Hopkins, Sian Simpson, and Natalie Ferguson. I'm sure they're more than happy to connect on LinkedIn, Insta, Twitter. They've got obviously huge social presence, so please go ahead and give them your support. Always happy to connect, and hope everyone has a fabulous night. Thanks so much, ladies.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.